I'm talking to Gabriel today, and Gabriel was recently had a discussion with Paul Vanderclay, and I heard your talk, and it was surprising, like how many. Well, maybe it's not surprising, but there's many points in your story that I could relate to, and not necessarily exactly the same, but similar. And that's kind of the interesting thing, is seeing how your story can be similar and yet different from somebody else, and comparing those things kind of gives the opportunity for us to uh, learn and explore a little bit. So the so I have two YouTube channels, and this will probably parts of this will probably be on both. One of them is just for my personal whatever I want to put. And so, so we can talk about anything. But my other one that I'm kind of working on is trying to figure out how to encourage people to create mentorship relationships and like apprenticeships in working in the trades and building things, and working with your hands and all that stuff, because for me that's been like an extremely beneficial way of helping me make sense of life and understanding God and the world and other people. So it sounds like you have had a lot of similar experience doing stuff like that. So maybe if you want to just share like kind of what you do for work now, or some of the things that you've done that got you there, that would be cool.
Yeah, currently what I'm doing, a friend of mine started a smaller business. We're taking vintage airstream trailers, and we gut them, and we basically just take the shell off and throw everything else away. We build new frames, put in new floors, all new plumbing, all new electrical insulation, new interior skins, all the new appliances and fans and air conditioners, and then we build out all the furniture. And within a small business, there's only 3 of us right now. I think we maxed out at 6 employees at one point, but we've been feeling the economy a little bit, but we're staying busy. But right now there's 3 of us, and so you wear a lot of hats in a small business. So I do the CAD design and the metal fabrication for the most part, and just anything that needs doing. A lot of fabrication. That's my main thing. Working with wood and metal primarily, a lot of aluminum and some steel, especially framework and things like that. And then we generally it's just plywood and then solid wood for things like doors and faces and any little fixtures and things like that. So I do the CAD design for that. You can check out Miller Garage Airstreams. That's if you want to see kind of what we're doing. We completed a trailer recently that should have a video up soon, and it was all my design, full design in CAD before we started cutting. And recently we've been speaking of trouble finding people to do work for you. We were having trouble keeping a good carpenter who could really put things together and build them. He and I both have just general knowledge and capability, and we're able to do those things, but there's so much else that needs to be done. We were kind of looking for stuff like that, but what we ended up doing is getting a robot. We got a big old 5x10 CNC machine, so we could do the design in CAD and then go over and cut all of our cabinetry on the table, and then just take it off and assemble it. And there's a lot of problems to solve with that as well, but once you get it kind of dialed in. And currently we're working on, because I was able to parameterize the whole trailer into the CAD program we're using, which is Autodesk Fusion 360. And so all we have to do is we get a new trailer in, we take all the measurement, copy a file over, take all the measurements, and it just sets us up to do that trailer. And we can build the skins in there and the subfloor and lay out the frame, and then I can build the furniture and import it into that file. So we basically have the whole trailer built out in 3D before we even need to start building and cutting. So that's been a pretty big step forward. And that's something later on we can talk about as well, because I know you're interested in kind of bringing back the making things beautiful, and I think a big part of that will be incorporating the new technologies as well. People who love to just work with their hands, and I was one of those people.
Yeah.
you kind of you kind of that vaguely Luddite uh, feeling towards things like that. But as you kind
Yeah.
of get into it, you realize it opens up a whole new realm of creativity and also scalability, which is important for making money and making more things beautiful. So there's certainly a line there as far as the handmade and then the manufactured, but I think it's a line that needs to be explored. But yeah, that's what I do. A lot of fabrication, a lot of CAD design, and currently working on product design because we're wanting to be able to help other people do their airstreams. So we'll be able to package and kind of sell all those things out so that they can do it and work with other shops to kind of provide what they need as well. So that's kind of the direction we're going in.
That's really cool. I actually, so when we so I've been here in Texas for about 5 years now, and when we moved, I just bought like a 5x8 enclosed trailer for like $1,000 to move all our stuff, and my plan is someday to like turn it into a camper, like with fold out sides and stuff. So
yeah,
I'll definitely rely on your expertise to help me figure out some of the plans for that stuff. But that's pretty
point
cool.
you in the right direction.
Yeah. So that's cool, and that's cool too that you're not, because I was wondering, about that, because if what kind of tools and processes you were using and stuff, because I was sort of, I wouldn't say I was necessarily, well, okay, so the shop that I worked at before, they got a CNC router in, and nobody knew how to use it, so I was the one that had to learn how to use it. And there is like a little bit of the fear or whatever, like, is this machine going to replace me or whatever? But then you once you start doing it, you realize you can't um, you need the knowledge of how the actual materials work and what you're going to do and all that stuff in order to actually use the CNC router well. Like, so somebody maybe can make designs or something, but you still need to know about the physical uh, characteristics of plywood or whatever you're doing on it, and you still need to have some skill to, like, the stuff doesn't usually come off ready to use. Usually there's a few more steps before you can do it.
A
So
lot of
that was yeah. So that was like a good thing for me to figure out, like, okay, there's, I think, made me realize there's always going to be a need for people, even though we have these fears about like technology taking over the world, making humans obsolete. I think it just maybe raises the bar for what we consider possible, because these machines will make things that were routine but labor intense easier. But then that means you can now do something that would have been inconceivable before. So I mean, I think because people are still like the engines of creativity. It's not, the machines aren't really going to be designing new things without imagination, I guess, or something. So um,
I think
well,
a big part of what the machines do for us is it kind of like you've mentioned in your other videos as well, it's taking the more mundane, less creative aspects that just need to be done
yeah,
and really cranking those things out. And that, for us, what it's done is it's increased our creativity because we have more time to design and we have more time to do custom work and we have more time to take the time to do certain things with our hands to add that beauty and that accent. So the way I see it, it's another tool that kind of lifts you up a level and allows
yeah,
you to start to use your creativity at on more projects and at a greater sort of in a greater capacity, because you're able to build more foundation under yourself with the machines to kind of fill in that to speed things up and shorten the amount of time you're just grinding and really allow you to seek out those projects that interest you and that interest others and that add that value to what you're doing. So we've found it to be really useful in that sense.
Yeah, I've been missing having access uh, to a CNC router, or now it's like thinking, I don't know, should go that way or like look into like laser cutters or things like that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
pretty incredible now. You can just have like a handful of these things, and what you can do with them is pretty neat. And I mean, honestly, I feel like there's some like I just went to a little area with kind of small shops the other day, and there was a place that had like a that did stuff with wood, like designs and like decorative stuff. And I was just looking at all the stuff, and I'm like, this is like the most boring stuff that you can do with this machine. So like
Yeah.
the amounts that these technologies are really being utilized are we're still like, I think, at the beginning stages of like what we could do. So
No,
it, yeah.
definitely. And I think too, a lot of people, and I've noticed it in this corner, and I'm sure if you had the conversation with them, they you know go through it and kind of think through it a little more. But you've got like Pajot's an icon carver, and a lot of people are interested in that kind of art and the decorative and beautiful architecture and design you see in cathedrals and things like that. But at the same time, to get to that point where you can adorn this cathedral, it's like you're making bricks and you're cutting stone
Yeah.
and you're putting in plumbing and you're laying floors and it's just there's so much behind. It's like the tree versus the flowers. You have to
Mm-hmm.
understand how the root system works, how the trunk needs to be so that it doesn't fall down in an earthquake, what the branches are going to look like and how they're going to span the spaces and open them up. And then you get down to the little details of the twigs and the leaves that just make it easy to maintain and easy to run. And then you start to have those blooms, and it's best to have all that in mind throughout the whole project. But a big part of what I think just the more artistic types miss is like where you're building the palette. You have to build your canvas. You have to make your wireframe before you sculpt in clay. Like it's that undergirding that allows you the space and the to do all those beautiful things in that artwork and to really create that altogether striking product at the end. And so
Yeah.
I think that's something especially that needs to be incorporated more and more, because you hear people complain in this little corner talking about how do we make things, how do we do things, how do we get things going, I want to make things beautiful, I want to add to this world. It's like, well, you kind of have to figure out your infrastructure, and you kind of have to figure out all the boring little bits underneath, and you have to find those people who are interested in doing and maintaining and running that sort of thing, and then you can build on top of that. And so I'm hoping to see more and more of that kind of develop in this little corner, so that the ideas and the people and the creations can kind of spread out. And what that looks like in a digital sense, I'm less familiar, because I've been in the tangible my whole life.
Yeah.
And even doing this StreamYard thing, I was like, okay, how do I do this? Okay, it was pretty simple, and then
Yeah.
able to do it. But I was completely unprepared for kind of having these conversations, so I had to catch up real quick. So I've definitely had tools in my hands and less on the digital side of things, though I am figuring it out as I go along. So, but
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess so. Then the other things, though, obviously, you and I both are able to consume and benefit from a lot of these different conversations, and not just conversations, as well, but like things like audiobooks and just having access to like teachings and stuff like that, like, because it doesn't necessarily take your full mental concentration to do a lot of the stuff, but like, how has that benefited you or whatever? Like, or when did you kind of first start listening to things or whatever while you're working, and you know incorporating that into your habits, or whatever?
yeah, it kind of started many years back. I worked at DFW Airport as a valet for one of the small companies that was operating at the time, and So I had a lot of, when you valet is a little different at the airport because you have a lot of time waiting either back before to run cars and you're driving them all the way out to the airport from the warehouse, or you're sitting and waiting on customers, or you're sitting in the van as they shuttle you back, and you kind of got to run through all the terminals and pick everybody up. So you have a lot of time there. So I kind of started with that. And then after that, I was a cobbler for a number of years in the old town on Main Street. And that all that was working with my hands, sitting at the bench, just bringing it, fixing shoes and luggage and purses and whatever. I was the rips guy, so a lot of problem solving, and so I just had my headphones in constantly. And then now at this current job, it's the same sort of thing. The more complex, when you're really doing the CAD design and you're doing the calculations and you're doing the math, I got to turn it off for a second. But once you're just in that flow of design and in that flow of fabrication, you can really just plug them in, because that part of your brain is no longer necessary to run those things. So yeah, I just pretty constant. And I've over the years kind of cycled through different things. And but I mentioned on that talk I had with Paul that I kind of went the Joe Rogan to Jordan Peterson to Jonathan Pajot to PVK, and PVK to you, like you guys, and hopefully more channels who are interested in the same sort of things that I am. I'm hoping to have those conversations as well. So I'm grateful that you took the time to talk to me. But yeah, just really benefited from, I love the science and the art and the philosophy and all that stuff. So just hearing those conversations, and they would be a good jumping off point for me to do more research in depth. And I found too in the podcasts, to make them interesting, people tend to jump to their speculations as well. So you kind of get that bleeding edge of thought, like what people are thinking about on the very edge of the latest is when it comes to science or philosophy, or just really things that they're wrestling with. And those were the things that always interested me, is the difficult questions, the unsolved mysteries, the things that haven't been sorted out yet. And when I would hear these very intelligent, learned people start to kind of speculate about what they think it may be and what they're looking at right now, that really gave me the opportunity to kind of get in their head and then read up on what they're reading about and what they're working on. And I think that allowed me to jump a lot of levels as far as thinking that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. So the education you get is maybe dangerously fast at sometimes, but I think it's useful in a way that you can really get to the forefront. You just have to be careful to kind of fill in your back knowledge so you can actually understand what it is they're talking about, because it can be very complex and involved. But if you take the time to kind of build that knowledge that allows you to understand those things, and I think asking those more difficult questions, whatever the topic may be, it kind of points out your ignorances as well. So you have to go back and really think through what I don't know and get yourself to a level where you can understand and you can be involved in the conversation. So when you're motivated, these podcasts that are really pushing the limits of what we're thinking about right now, really allow you to find your way up to the top levels of, I think, honestly, what's most important and what's on the forefront of people's minds. So it's been really helpful and useful for me. The term autodidact, I think, definitely applies to a lot of people in the corner, and certainly to myself. So
well, I definitely can relate to all that, because it's like, you're you start in some place, and then you're hearing like all these different words or things, or like, I don't know what that is, but you can kind of get the gist of it from the context, but then you have to like go and like do more research or whatever. And and I think there's definitely like a lot of things where like my beliefs and conceptions of things have been challenged a lot, but then once you dig into those things, you're much better off for having explored it. But it is like it's just it's exhausting at times, because it's like, I mean, I don't know, I don't know how you feel. Like I think when I first started, like kind of taking what I knew when I came in and kind of connecting to some of these new ideas, I was thinking of it more as like, as a Christian, and like the way that like Christian apologetics has gone in the past. It was like you had to really be an expert like on everything because you were always worried about like defending your right to believe whatever. um,
Yeah.
but I think if you try to approach all this stuff in that way, it's kind of gets exhausting, and it's not really possible. But I think like I really liked whatever the conversation was where Peterson was like talking about how like people are really good at just getting the gist of things, and I was like, yeah, that's the word. Like just because you kind of get the basic concepts, you get the basic idea, and then you can kind of see like um I don't necessarily have to explore all the way down that rabbit hole because I can see the direction it's going, and I'm pretty sure it's gonna it's gonna end up where I think it is or whatever. Um, but I don't know where I was going with that exactly. But yeah, it's an interesting thing because I think now the mood of the conversation is like um, maybe like when we think about like experts from academia or mainstream culture, they very much put that pressure on like your opinions or your ideas don't matter because you don't have the same level of expertise. And now it seems like a lot of people are basically like, you know what, it's too much work to like get that level of expertise in all these different things because what happens is you're really myopic. Like, if you're just the know everything there is to know about like Plato and Aristotle, but then you don't know general things about science, or if you don't even understand like the practical kind of things you learn from working through like we do, like building things or just touching physical stuff, then you're kind of forced to put everything that you don't understand it like to the side, and it's just like it's not part of the world. So I mean, I think I think that's a trade off or whatever. Like um it's been a long time where specialists have been like in charge, but they're the person who's more of a generalist who knows a little bit about all sorts of things kind of is starting to maybe have the advantage, or at least it's like I feel like now we have permission to speculate about how the world is and how it might work on those grounds. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a certain sort of intuition that comes with, or generally, I would say that intuition is built with experience. So if you limit your experiences by specializing, you tend to have a limited intuition. And it may be correct on very specific things, but like you say, when you get that general experience and you put yourself out there in new and different situations that you haven't been through, and you try to learn as much as you can about how the world works and how materials work and how things integrate, you are able to take that broader perspective and kind of, I think you're more able to guide the process when it comes to trying to create anything or build anything or make use of any sort of science or technology that comes along. I think one thing that I've enjoyed being in a small business is my my mind kind of works in a way, it classifies different things conceptually. So I'll have the idea of a tool in my head that we have, and it's this shape and it has these properties. And what will happen is we'll be trying to solve a problem that we don't have the right tool for exactly, or we don't know exactly what to do to accomplish our goal. And what my brain will do, having had that experience working with a variety of materials and tools, it'll kind of start to just go out into the ether, that creative space, and look for shapes, almost like a puzzle piece, like shapes that conceptually fit into the problem we're trying to solve. So it's like, a real simple example is a little while back, we had a weld on the frame that kind of gave us a little bend on this plate we had put on. And because of the spacing, there wasn't really a good way to brace it so we could fit the axle up into there and bolt it on. And it was just barely not enough. And so I just real quick, I was like, oh, we have these screw jacks that, you know, we use to hold up things on the ceiling. Let's just turn it sideways and use it to press that plate out just enough to pop this over so we can get that, because we had that solid weld, but now we got to get the bolts on. And so just in ways of that intuition you build, just working with the tools over and over again, you develop an understanding of just how things work generally, and you're able to take those things and insert them in ways that you wouldn't have necessarily expected. And that's a big part, I think, of innovation and moving forward, because eventually maybe you can afford the tool that is good for that. But in the meantime, ask anybody who's tried to start a small business, which is a lot of what you're going to be doing, that early stage innovation, even at the higher levels, when you're doing something that nobody else has done, you have to look for tools that already exist that you can insert into the application. You have to look for materials that already exist that you can bring into the application. And then how those materials and tools work or fail give you an intuition about, okay, well, what kind of tool do I need to design? What kind of material do I need to create in order to solve this problem? Because it is the very specific forms of failure that happen that allow you to intuit the direction you need to go. So it is, I agree that there is a gap of that kind of the theorist first experimenter that you're seeing in science. It's like the theory is really popular and it's interesting and it gets a lot of good articles, and but the experimentalist, it's grueling and it's a lot of work and it's not always very interesting, and most of it's what you prove not to be the case. So it's just a long, difficult process. And it's the same sort of thing in our lives day to day, whether we're building homes or working on new technologies or whatever it is we're doing. Just being in it and interacting with it and touching it and building it and trying it in different ways and using different materials and tools and figuring out exactly what works and what doesn't, and in what way those things work and do not work, gives you that experience and intuition, which I think, coming back to the conversation of wisdom that's going on in this little corner and in some of the other circles as well, is like, that's how you get that wisdom, is being in it. And I think things can become sinister and dangerous when you get the elites, or however you want to classify them, thinking that they can think top down on how everything works, when at the same time, if their toilet overflowed, they don't even understand the mechanism under that little ceramic top, which is just incredibly basic. And so it's little things like that that someone who has never opened the top of their toilet can never anticipate. And so the idea that you can run a community or a society or a nation from the top down without that integrated understanding, which lives in the people that are there, it's not something that you keep in your head because you don't have the capacity. There's too many things, there's too many moving parts. So you build up the people who love or enjoy, or at least find some sort of satisfaction in maintaining the things that are necessary, so that the people at the top can continue to push the bounds and the innovators can continue to innovate and grow. It's again back to that metaphor of the tree. It's like, you got to let the trunk do its job. You got to let the roots do their job, and you have to do whatever you can to enable them to do that job well, so that you can make beautiful blooms. And I think that's something that's so easy to forget. The more educated you become, the higher your IQ is, the quicker you're able to process information. It's like, oh, I can anticipate everything. It's like, you can't. The complexity of even the simplest systems just explodes infinitely. And the things that go wrong, like, you need people with that intuition built in. You need the people with that experience and that presence as well to to run the thing that's there. And so I certainly agree with what you're saying. There is that gap between the people who know a lot about very specific things and the guiding generalists who can kind of see the bigger picture, and then your specialists down below as well that are keeping things running. So it's like there's the generalist gap in between the people who are keeping things running and the people who are trying to run things. And so I would
Yeah,
definitely mirror
and
in that sense.
I don't know just too. It's like I almost feel like it's interesting because, or even with like the not just specialization or expertise, but even just the way that we try to um, break things down to like formulas, or because you want to reproduce it, or you want somebody else to be able to do what you're trying to do. So, and this is not, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because because I think about like so in my job, there's a lot of tasks that are fairly repeatable. And part of the fun, creative aspect of it is that over the years of doing it, it's fixing cabinets. So it's like it's a box, and you have to put it to, something breaks and you have to put it together in some way. There's like a million ways to solve a lot of these problems, and you can and you look at the circumstance to figure out like why would you use this technique instead of that one. And it could even be like, what maybe one reason is like I left a tool at home that I would normally use, so I got to figure something else out to get the same job done. Um, and then when I got a little bit more involved with like training other people, it's like you can't overwhelm them with like uh, 18 different options of how to solve every problem. So you try to like maybe think of the most common way that you would do it, and you try to break it down into steps, which is a good thing, because then it's like at least they know how to do it under the ideal circumstances. And then it's like, okay, what do you do when something goes wrong? That maybe they can figure it out on their own, or maybe they need to make a phone call. And now, like I said, I'm at the point now where I've basically thought through, like, if I have to explain this to somebody else, somebody who's new, like, will they know what I'm talking about if I describe this part or this piece or this tool or something, to try to like communicate it. um so having like those kind of formulas or like instructions are good as a starting point. But then and I even think about this like with the way we like do church and stuff like that, like then you take these formulas and you turn it into like a sacred thing or whatever, like it must be followed in these ways. And then you're kind of yeah. And then it's like then it's kind of excluding people from the process or whatever. So I feel like that's kind of the problem with uh, with how these things kind of tend to go or whatever. Um, and like there were some guys that were kind of talking about this, like talking about like if you're gonna make bread or something, and you're gonna make it from like, you shouldn't have to use a recipe, like, because that's not like the authentic way. And but people need to start somewhere.
My wife is a trained baker, so I know how, like a pastry chef, she was trained in school as a pastry chef, so I know how
Yep.
ridiculous it is. Because when it comes to cooking, you can kind of get away with free form and just play with flavors, and it's a lot more kind of, you have a lot more liberal options with that. But when it comes to the baking, like there is a specific science. And I think
Yeah.
getting back to what you're saying about teaching people, a lot of what I think it gets missed, and I've tried to employ this with my children as well, is engaging that problem solving and thinking aspect of their mind by teaching them the tools and teaching them the materials. It's like, okay, this is what the flour is for. This is the structure it forms. This is what the baking soda is for, and the baking powder. This is the difference between the two. This is how water interacts with flour and sugar. And so kind of teaching those concepts of the materials and concepts of the tools. Like, this is what your mixer can and can't do. This is when you would want to use a hand mixer. And just teaching them about all the materials and the tools, and then being like, okay, so you have all these materials and tools that we've talked about. Now here's a problem, and I want you to solve it. And then I'm here for your questions. And teaching people to ask questions and getting people to ask questions is so huge, because we all not all of us, but there are many of us who had that experience with the father. It's, you ask a question and he doesn't have time for you a lot of the time. He doesn't have time to answer your questions. He's just trying to get things done. And so I know in my own case, there were times where I would hesitate to ask questions. And then I learned very quickly, especially in the trades, you got to be able to ask questions. So teaching people to ask those questions available as they try to solve the problem, because that's the part of their brain you want to engage when you hire someone and you train them, is I need you to figure out how to solve these problems. And here's, and again, like you said, you can show the simple, here's one way to do it, but I need you to learn all these tools and all these materials, because there will be situations where that exact sequence is not going to apply. So I agree with you very much that, and that was another thing, and I'm sure many guys have experienced this, when your dad teaches you something and he teaches, this is how it's done, or in church, this is how we think about this is how we do this. And there is benefit to that. For some people, they need a more rigorous structure, but in scatterbrained creatives like myself, it's like I need more room to move and think, so that I can understand this from every angle, because that's how I dial in the best way for it to be done. Even if I land on exactly what they taught me, the trouble with my mind is it's like I have to understand it from all angles before I can agree with you that this is the way it needs to be done. And there's a certain value, and it's something I've had to discover over time, because I didn't never really valued the way my mind worked, because it wasn't convenient for people to have someone that always questioning, always casting doubt, always trying to figure out exactly why you're doing what you're doing. But I see the benefit in that, because as you slip into that dogma, it becomes, it doesn't adapt well to new situations. And as life moves forward, the situations change and the environment changes and circumstances changes and what's available changes. And if you don't have those people in your midst who are able to adapt and able to recognize, okay, we're trying to accomplish this goal and we have these tools and materials at hand, here's how we could solve it. Here's how we could evolve what we're doing into a new shape that'll accomplish the same thing, but in a new way. And so I've really had to come to grips with the fact that my mind works that way and I have value in that space. And I think the more calcified things are becoming these days, hopefully people like me will find places where we can be useful and we can be valuable and we can really help to kind of reform what it is that our parents built, not tear it down entirely, but recognize what was good about how things were done and recreate that in a new and potentially more effective way, which takes us up again to that level and allows us another level of creativity that we didn't have access to before. It's the same thing back to the CNC. It's like this, all that knowledge we learned about how to work with wood is now encapsulated in this machine. And now when we can apply that machine, we have another level of creativity we have access to. And so I think it all intertwines in that way. And I definitely agree with you on that point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because I remember when people were talking about recipes and stuff too, I was thinking, okay, but most of the time, like a recipe for bread or something, it will say, like, if it's too dry, add some more, add a tablespoon of water. If it's too wet, add a tablespoon of flour, which is helpful. But then that also means, how do you know if it's too wet or too dry? You either need somebody to help you figure that out, walk you through it, or you need to give the person who's trying to learn, you have to give them the space to make some bad bread. And I think, maybe it's going to be edible. It may not be, that's the thing, it's like, I don't know. I feel like maybe that's where, like, church or whatever gets a little bit too uptight about the rules and stuff like that. Like, maybe it's not perfect bread, but it is edible bread. Like, people need the you need the space to allow people to become experienced through failure.
That's a big part of why I appreciate estuary, and I'm actually kind of in talks, at least early stages of talking with people getting one started in the DFW area. So if anybody out there is in Dallas, just through my Twitter or my website, superegonaut.com, just reach out to me if you're in Dallas, because I'm hoping to do that. But that's a big part of why I appreciate the estuary model, because it is that space to make that that crappy bread. It is that
Yeah.
space to have difficult conversations. It is that space where people who are not comfortable in the church come in and have the conversation, and it is an inroad into the more specialized thing. Because I have nothing against tradition and like doing things a certain way and having your liturgies and things like that. They have value, immense value. But if you don't have a way in, if you don't have a place for people to understand why these are important and to understand them from every angle, someone like me and the way I think, I'm not going to be comfortable just stepping in and joining in. Whereas some people are happy to just kind of line up and step in and then discover it as they go. I kind of have to understand things ahead of time. And
Yeah.
the estuary, I think, is a great format for like that space of doing things badly so that we can do them better.
Mm. So kind of go back on that, maybe take a step back. So like, how did you first start learning how to do this stuff? Or I mean, I think, because you said your dad taught you some stuff, right? Or how did your skills kind of grow over time?
Yeah, we lived in a little tiny duplex, but we had a separate garage sort of building. It was more of a shed,
Mm.
really, where you could park the cars. But instead of parking the car in there on our side of the garage, my dad had a little workshop. So I think the biggest tool he had was a radial arm saw, and then a bunch of power tools and hand tools. And then so I picked a lot up there. I got my first toolkit when I was really young. Got my first Swiss Army knife when I was 4 or 5, like probably 5 years old. Back when you would give kids knives at that age.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
um, so I was always outside and building, and we had a lot of room. It was a small house, but the lot had a big backyard as a result. So we always had room to do things like that. And then luckily, my dad had done some work in the independent film industry and had met up with a guy who he's he came from an oil family, but he did film for fun, and he had a machine shop on his property in Dallas, a big old multi-acre property in the middle of Dallas with this big house that was built 100 years ago. And he had built himself a machine shop, and he had all these old tools, gear cutters, lathes, mills, all that stuff. And then at one point he built a bigger shop with like the full length gantry and the giant compressor and all of that. So it was really, really awesome space to work. The TIG arc welder and the plasma cutters and all that stuff. And
Mm.
I'm I was a big fan of that show. Do you remember Monster Garage with Jesse James on
I
Discovery?
didn't. I
And
never
there was
really
all
watched
the
it, but yeah.
yeah, there was all
But I
those
think I'm
motorcycles,
yeah,
like motorcycle shows, like custom chopper shows and
yeah,
things like that.
yeah.
I I hit those like right around 18, and
Mm-hmm.
so I was like, huh, maybe I'll build one. So I built a little one. It's about 7 feet long, and you sit about a foot off the ground, and it's got a little single cylinder Briggs and Stratton that you got a pull start. But I went all in. I built ground up. I built the frame. I built all the tanks. I built the front springed front end, and then even he helped me machine certain aspects of it, so that it would all work, it all function. So you got your gears and your axles, and we cut the axles ourselves and cut the keys into the axles. So that was big. That was a really important project that allowed me to learn a lot of what I learned. And then I learned leather work. I had actually been doing some of it for fun, but that's how I got my job, because my wife, uh, girlfriend at the time, had gotten a job at a restaurant on Main Street, and she was like, "Hey, the shoe shop next door is hiring, and I know you're tired of valeting at the airport." So I just showed them some of my leather work, and they hired me. So I had no prior experience, but they saw the quality of what I was doing, and they took me on, and that ended up being. So I learned a lot of things from him, and so I've kind of just moved from job to job. just picking up what I can as I go along. And now in this new situation, I've been able to learn CAD design and to learn, especially working with aluminum, was because I had primarily worked with steel. So it's kind of just go where work is and show your portfolio of quality products. And nowadays,
Yeah.
especially as bad as people are hurting, people will just be like, oh, well, this kid knows what he's doing. He doesn't necessarily know the specifics about what we're doing, but he's clearly capable of quality work. So I'll take him on and teach him what I can, or let him learn. In the case of the guy I'm working with, we were actually roommates years ago, and he's maybe about a year younger than me. So we're kind of working at it together, figuring it out. So just finding opportunities where you can learn something you didn't know how you could do before. And I was definitely blessed to have the shop my dad had in the little garage, and then the access to that much more advanced shop. I was very lucky in that sense to learn a lot of things from my dad and that old guy. So had the smoked the pipe and the handlebar mustache and everything. So
that's cool. Yeah, I mean, that was the thing that was it was so weird because like when I kind of just got the opportunity to kind of figure out this stuff like much later. Like I knew a lot of basic stuff because my dad was a teacher, but he would do like handyman jobs all during the summer. So a lot of painting and fixing stuff, and he was always building things in the house, like a little bit of plumbing and whatever else. And so I'd follow him around, and he showed me, when we were real young, like how to use a handsaw and how to hammer nails, and so that stuff was kind of always in the back of my head. And I kind of went for like, oh, I'm going to go pursue a ministry career. And, this is kind of part of my thinking behind this stuff is like, there's, unless if you're working for like a huge mega church or whatever, like most churches, like even the pastor's kind of, if he doesn't know how to do a lot of this kind of stuff, like he's got to figure it out, or he's going to be reliant on somebody else knowing how, or paying. And, when you're paying somebody to do this stuff, it's like very expensive compared to, not to say like it's not hard, it's, it's not hard to learn, or at least, to figure out how to do the stuff, the basic stuff, good enough or whatever, to fix the problems. So, and I had seen that because my dad ended up becoming a pastor. So he knew and he knew how to fix stuff. And so he was always fixing stuff around the church, which is great because it was a small church. They didn't have a lot of money and things like that. It was kind of like later on, I was like, I was like, 30. It was 30, and I didn't have a degree, and hadn't really built a resume of super marketable skills. And but our church had a big workshop. Basically, they bought this big thrift store and had a big workshop in the basement, and they let me mess around and do stuff, and so I got all the experience. And whenever they would ask me like, can we do this, I would just say, yeah, we can do it, and then I would figure out how to do it. Like that's what I kind of figured out. Like when you get the opportunities, you gotta jump on them. You can't. But it does require like a little bit of that freedom of knowing like you have some security if you make a mistake or something. It's not. But I think overall, it seems like from the experience I have working with others and stuff, it seems like that's kind of part of the nature of the work, like that the community tends to be understanding in that way, which is just like not the way it is in like corporate world or whatever, like. So I mean, I just even think it's such a healthier kind of environment for people especially for guys, because it seems like there's definitely, you know, and you were saying like growing up, you know, you kind of had uh, some tough battles and stuff, and I feel like the way things are going for guys, and especially like young boys trying to learn how to become young men, like there's not a lot of
Yeah.
people doing favors for boys and helping them figure out like how to grow up. So, um, let's see.
I
So,
think too, I watched one of your little compilation videos that you did early on, and talking about shop class going out of the school. It's just, you don't have the spaces anymore. Like they just don't
yeah,
exist. It is, and kind of like what we were talking about with the estuary. It's an intermediary area where people can make things badly. Is what shop class was, because
mm-hmm.
you can't. It is difficult. It is extremely difficult to bring someone into an operating business and let them play, in a sense. So
Yeah,
we don't, those play spaces don't exist anymore. And I would love to see something like that. And right now, what those play spaces are is like you and I know, it's our garage where we take our kids and we show them how to use things, and we give them what they need to experiment and try things out and build things badly and improve their skills. And so I think the responsibility, as it should, is kind of falling back on the parents to make these spaces for their kids. And homeschooling is going up in popularity, and more people are figuring that out. And I'd love to see, and I think that's the best way. I think it's always the best way for these things to be built bottom up. Like asking government, oh, put shop class back in the public schools.
mm-hmm.
I don't think that is the pathway forward. I think it's
Yeah,
okay. These homeschool communities, you know, the models I think I appreciate the most are the ones that have different parents who teach different things. So it's like, okay, well, if my kids are homeschooled and we join a community, I can be the shop class guy.
yeah,
Like I can take one day out of the week or on the weekend, a Saturday morning or whatever's available, and be that space where kids can come and ask their questions, and we can do projects and they can come up with their own ideas. And there, you have to have resources for that type of thing, but I think it's really not that much. And kind of, you can you can go around, half the time you can just go around checking dumpsters and sidewalks on the weekend and estate sales and garage sales, and be like, hey, this is what I do. If there's any of this stuff that doesn't sell, just, can I have it? And there's other ways to kind of build up stock. And I know, for in the case of our business, we have a ton of scrap, especially aluminum scrap, that we just
mm,
take to the scrap yard and sell by the pound, because
yeah,
it gets down to, there are certain sizes and shapes that we just have zero use for. But
yeah,
all those sizes and shapes would probably come in pretty handy for very specific, limited projects that you would want to do with a kid. So, and I've brought home a lot of stock wood and aluminum and steel and otherwise to kind of let my kids play. So
yeah,
I think it's just, I think, I think if you can find people who love to network, and that's a big part of the church as well, because you already kind of have that inbuilt network. People who love to network. My barber, he's a guy who knows everybody. If I mention something, I remember I have this big old heavy punching bag that I like to train with, and I wanted to build a hanger for it, um, that would fit in my garage and would be a little taller. And I mentioned to my barber, I was like, hey, I'm thinking about building this. And so if you know anybody with like 2-inch steel piping or something like that they're just getting rid of, and he's like, oh, I know a guy who's taking down his fence and he's just gonna throw that stuff out. You want a whole bunch of galvanized fence posts? And I was like, perfect. And so I went over there, took a sledgehammer, knocked the concrete off and washed them up and cut them to size, and built myself a big hanger for my 150-pound bag. And so it's just, it comes back to asking questions and having conversations, because if you don't say anything,
yeah,
nobody knows what you need. And if you don't communicate, there's no way of building that network. And so I think getting down to the issue of communicate, ask questions, build networks, be involved. It's all those simple things that you hear 1,000 times, but I think looking at it from another angle, it's the benefit of it is, oh, I have people who have resources. I have people who have their garbage is my gold in the situation that the goals I'm trying to achieve. Like in the case of all the scrap that we have, if we had somebody who's like, hey, came up and was like, I'm teaching kids basic metalworking skills. Would you guys be willing to put a pile of scrap together for me? And be like, absolutely. And when those kids have learned, send us the best ones and we'll put them to work. Because it is hard to find people who know what to do. And so building that network, giving things away for free and supporting projects like that is the way to make those people who can do the jobs that you need done. And so I would encourage everybody. It's like, get into church, like find a community, and then start telling people what you do and having conversations and asking, hey, I need this because I'm thinking about doing that. If anybody sees anything lying on the side of the road, just let me know. Because even if we find stuff that people have put out to get picked up by garbage, you have that many more eyes looking for that sort of thing. It's like, oh yeah, I remember it. And so it's just, there's an endless benefit to just building that network. And I think that's a lot of what's lacking. And back to the point I was making, I think that homeschooling model where it's like you're the shop class guy and your wife teaches English and the lady down the street teaches art, and is something that we're probably going to see more and more of, and would probably be the most effective way to start to bring that back in, to bring that space for boys back in to the education that they need to get, because like I mentioned before, that space doesn't exist anymore. It's gone.
Mm-hmm. I feel like, I mean, I feel like it's almost, and I work with high school students a little bit, and even still, it's like, it's like you can tell like already they've kind of like they're being trained in this mindset of like, don't break the rules, and like the focus is more on like not messing things up, rather it's like a totally negative message of what you can't do rather than what you can do. And it's just like how it's so necessary to kind of, I guess, basically getting that permission that like it's okay to mess stuff up, and like if you try to do something and it gets totally ruined or whatever, that's still a productive thing, because now you've learned a whole bunch of like stuff about how different materials work or how different tools work or what you did wrong. And most of the time it's not even that messed up. Like, I mean, I think about like I have like I built this little, for our first apartment we were in, I built this little table. I found this nice pedestal base for a table. It was like from a restaurant, like a bar kind of a table. So it was like a wooden, an oak like turned cylinder, and then it had like four brass like feet on the bottom, and it was just on the side of the road. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna grab that. And it was all green and like corroded, and I like shined it all up and stuff. Then I built like a little top for it, and we had a tiny little apartment. And I was like, this is like, okay, now we have like a little place to eat dinner, like on this tiny table. And then when we moved into a bigger place, we didn't need that table anymore. But then I took the top of the table and I made a new base and turned it into a coffee table. And then I took the base and put it on a bigger tabletop to make another dining table. Now I'm going to do the same thing again, because it's a little bit too wobbly for like a 5 foot table. But like even if stuff's like all of these things were like imperfect in some way, but they've all were able to like serve purposes and get it to like the next place, so which I mean, that's, I don't know, I guess, and part of my overall thing, like when I got into this discussion space and really kind of came up with this idea for this Tectonic School idea, is just that like the negative like energy, I guess you could say, is like so prevalent everywhere. Like, and I don't know, maybe that's like the sign of like our society as it currently exists is like coming to an end, because all of the options of what's possible for like people just to figure out how to like have a normal life have become like so narrow, and it's so hard for like people to find a way. And I think um if you can kind of look at things in a different way, then like suddenly it's like the world is full of possibilities again, you know? So um sorry, I think you're cut.
Oh, you,
you're you're a little slow. I
yeah,
don't know
you
if
couldn't
it's
hear me for a second there.
oh
You're
I
now.
was just saying, like, getting like to me, that's just this thing is like I don't know, training people's like always focusing on like the negative, what you can't do, what the problems are, what your limitations are, like because I think probably from your point of view, and my point of view, like problems are not problems are just what we do. Like that's like I feel like that's my job is just solving problems. Like if there wasn't any problems, I wouldn't have anything to do. So problems are not something to
It's
be afraid of.
the problem really is, and it's been said 1,000 times before by 1,000 people, is problem is opportunity is what that is. And I think the attitude has become problem's a problem. It's a negative thing. It's something to pass on to somebody else. It's something to avoid. And it's like, no, you got to go looking for problems because that's where you find the opportunity. You have to solve those problems because that's how you grow. So seeing the difficulty and the suffering and the issues and when things are not working, all that is opportunity for you to grow and expand and find that niche for yourself where you find the satisfaction. And that's a big thing too. I think exposing kids to that feeling of satisfaction like you had and I've had hundreds of times, picking something up on the side of the road, refurbishing it and making it something beautiful that you can use for your own family. And in the case of my wife, it's like finding those recipes and making it herself and then watching her children eat that meal that she created and exposing kids to the satisfaction that comes from that, because there's really nothing more satisfying than providing for others and satisfying others in a meaningful way. And it comes back to the importance of relationship. And so I just I think that's really important to spread spread the joy that comes from solving those problems yourself and addressing and seeing them as opportunities instead of be avoided. So
Um, so the other cool thing, obviously, that Paul really highlighted is you kind of have this project where you're making these like, maps of meaning, I guess you would say, or whatever. um, which I mean, I feel like honestly seeing those and like a lot of the conversations you kind of hear in this particular area, I could see a lot of people kind of getting really excited about those things because it's like um, well, because I guess so many people are having conversations where they're kind of really thinking about all these abstract things, and it kind of always lives there. But I'm always, I guess, wanting to connect it back down to the basic level, like the real life. What are you doing with your hands? What are you doing every day? In your family and your interactions with other people. So how does that kind of like help you kind of connect and make sense of everything?
yeah, I think what it does for me, and I talked more about it with Paul, just kind of the struggles I went through figuring out how the world worked and how to make my life work and how to understand how things work. And so it just became a hardcore pattern recognition project
Yeah,
where I wanted to get down to the base pattern because I understood, kind of like we talked about, you have to learn how things, the order of things, how they work, because generally speaking, there are certain things you have to do first. Like you got to mix the dough, back to my wife's metaphor, or metaphor of baking, you have to mix the dough before you bake it. If you bake it before you mix the ingredients, obviously, so it's something as simple as that. And so the idea was that, well, there are certain relationships within us, and there are ways that we understand the world and different realms, if you want to call it that, that we have to access, like the space-time realm and the morality realm and the values and perception and the body, like those different realms. We have to look into that space, and we have to take in information, and we have to process that, and then actualize it in our outside of ourselves, so that we can continue to get feedback and update. So that's what that really is. It, as I'm trying to articulate it visually, is how are we taking them in? What does the processing look like? And what are the means by which we actualize? And when we are either acknowledged or interrupted, and we have that interaction, we take that information back in a specific way and process it with a specific tool and actualize it again. And I think in order, it's kind of something I've been toying with, this idea of, if you can have those different aspects of your system, and you have a cycle that they have to go to based on an order of operations, that cycle and that order of operations ensures that all the different aspects are accounted for in any sort of change or update or decision making. So it's kind of like a business. It's like you want to have accounting and your workers in the field and your suppliers. You want all of those things communicating, and you don't want one to get left out, because if you put in a bid on a job and you realize, oh, I didn't account for the fluctuating prices of this particular material, or the access I would have to this team in order to build this particular aspect of this project, because the communication wasn't there, like, then you're going to have some serious problems. So I was looking for a way that, because I understood that certain things had to come before others, and because I understood that you'd want to have some fail safes for any sort of decision making, so that all the different aspects of yourself were accounted for to make the best possible decision. That's kind of what it's becoming, is a model of just how we think and how we interact with the world. And I think the pattern applies too on the individual level and the family level and the community level. And so just trying to understand how that all fits together. And I think that was the most difficult part of the project, is integrating all the different aspects in a beautiful way, which was really what I was going for, because I wanted people to look at it and I wanted people to be interested. And so you build all those little blocks and lines, and you connect all the threads to all the different pictures hanging on your wall. You just look like a crazy person. So it's like, well, if I can take my crazy and organize it in a way that is appealing and makes sense, that maybe out of it I can draw something useful. So for me, I still don't know quite what the end looks like as far as what the project is going, what purpose it's going to serve. But it's just one of those things that I just, deep down, if I walk away from it too long, I start to get kind of depressed and my mind will start to wander. But when I wisely take time to work on it in a healthy way, I get a lot of satisfaction, and I feel like I'm on the right path. And whether or not that's true, my general intuition is when this has its proper place in my life and I'm working on it on a regular basis, I feel more peaceful and more like I'm on the right path. So that's the justification I have to continue to do it, is just an intuition that it's important and needs to be done. And I don't know that I can give much more than that, but I hope that kind of explains what I'm aiming at.
So I had a question too, because I was thinking about, just in comparison to like how I would work or whatever in a creative process, like how often do you you know, because it looks like, because you've kind of gone through different iterations of these things, right? Those like different things. Like how often do you get like, do you usually like finish it and then you're like, no, and then you have to do another one, or do you like get part of the way through and then you're like, no, I got to start it again and do it a different way? Like, how does that kind of go?
Yeah, the most finished ones are the ones that I made available. There was the very first one that was really basic, and that one just like lightning just hit me, and I sat down and drew it real quick. And then after that, I actually have them sitting here. They're poorly framed. Like after that one, there were a few intermediaries, like you say, you toss them. Like I don't know how big my stack little doodles and drawings trying to organize this is, but it's quite substantial now. But then like this was, let's see if you can, this was what other way. One, that was the next one that got the most finishing done to it. And again, I'm trying to make these things beautiful. So
it does look beautiful.
Next. And then there was a lot more doodling and sketching and intermediaries. And then this one came after that. Everything's mirrored, so I have to move the opposite direction. So that was the next one. And then I started to get a little more analytical because I was really trying to understand the parts. And so this was the next. It's a little more engineering based, kind of sorting those out. So it's not, this one wasn't as decorative because I was more focused on solving the problems and figuring that stuff out. And then this one was the one you saw, and it doesn't have the color because I did the color digitally, but that's the most recent one. So those are kind of the checkpoints, if you will, as far as just developing that. But yeah, I threw out I usually was pretty sure about where I was at when I undertook those more detailed versions. And then even if I did have some doubts or anything like that, I finished it because I wanted to have a complete version of where I was at the time. But there are a lot of sketches that got crumpled up and thrown out, or at least thrown in the stack because they were incomplete. So it was a long process of trial and error and eventually developing those more finished versions, just as kind of I think it was more for me than for anybody else to feel like I was making progress. You kind of,
well, because I mean, imagine too, like, I mean, at least as far as like your most developed iteration, even though it takes a long time to get there, you've internalized it. So it's like you could probably, like, if you lost it, you could probably reproduce that one much quicker because it actually like makes sense in your head, you know. And then because it's and I guess that's the thing of like that's the thing that I feel like is shied away from, you know. I want to just say like in church or whatever, or maybe like in a particular church or in the way that people do business and all these things, is like there's not enough value placed on the process. And really, I think because the product of those processes is like, you have a picture, that's the product, but the real product is that you have developed as a person, like through these experiences. And so like that's kind of what I want, you know. That's kind of the way I'm trying to think of, like kind of like need to shift our like economy of, you know, what we value from the things that people produce to the people themselves and how they are like improved or whatever. And I feel, you know, and I kind of feel like maybe if we do that, like, and it seems like a biblical concept that maybe if we focus like in our businesses on helping people to grow and become the people that they ought to be, that like the money will come also, you know, like that's like, you know, it's you know, I think from a biblical perspective it kind of makes sense, you know, because you're seeking
Yeah.
first the kingdom, which is kingdom is made of people. Without people, you don't really have a kingdom. You can't be. You can if you're king of empty land, you're not. That's not really of a thing. So.
And I appreciate what you were saying about those checkpoints, like taking the level you're at and making something, because in a lot of ways it provides a reference point for you and for others to see how far you've come. Because you can learn and learn and learn and learn, but if you don't ever put anything out, you don't even know how far you've come. You don't even know what you're capable of, much less anybody else. So just as I did with those drawings, it's just taking the time to slow down and take what you have so far and do the best you can and make that thing and complete it. Because that's an important part of learning as well, is to completion. You got to finish the project, finish what you start. I mean, how many hundreds of times have kids heard that from their parents? You got to finish what you start.
Yeah.
And so just learning that aspect of it as well, and at the same time marking your progress. And so, like, I've written a stack of books that are out of date at this point, but I use them as reference material going forward, because I've organized a lot of my thought and a lot of my ideas in those books. And now I can use them to quick reference just all the things that I've already done. And so I would encourage anybody who's learning something to occasionally stop and start a project that pushes your skills to the limit, pushes your thinking to the limit, pushes the concepts you're struggling with to the limit, and write it out and articulate it as best you can in a way that you're hoping to communicate it to somebody else or share it with somebody else. And it's so important to do that, like you said, to mark your progress, and again, to use as reference going forward, because it is a jumping off point to improve upon what you've done already. So I really appreciate your point about that.
Yeah, that's kind of just what I've been doing as I just go through the Bible. Like, I'm just trying to go through like all these different like periods of time, like trying to figure out like just like go through like to Noah or something. It's like Noah had to have like some sort of a like complete picture of what he understood based on the information that he had about like the nature and the character of God and like what God's plan, was, because you need that like in order to be a faithful person, like to do stuff, like because if, and I think that's one of the fun things that now there is a lot more people kind of taking that sort of thing seriously, and like the way that people have been digging into like these really old stories, because I mean, I even think about it like, yeah, I mean, for a long time, I probably thought like I would always enjoy like when I got to that part in reading, but it's like you're done with those stories when you're like out of Sunday school or whatever, once you're grown up, it's like we're always focusing more on like the abstract concepts of things or the like direct application to our everyday lives. And I'm trying to teach this to some high school students, and I think some of them are like, I don't know what's going on, but like but I'm trying to like figure out how to get them to see the importance of that, of like, because like I look at the Bible, it's like DNA, it's like the information is there in every cell, and so you may not, you need the whole picture to see like, what the big plan is, but then it needs to also like make sense in all of its like little chunks. And sometimes you have to do a lot of work because you figure out like this story and this story really seem to conflict with each other is what they're saying, but there must be some point, higher up where they mesh, and where it's those conflicting images are united. And of course that's kind of the thing that we get just by like talking to other people, but it requires that we have the freedom to make mistakes, like I think that's an even important part. Like you need to be able to make mistakes in developing your own theology or your own understanding of like God and the Bible and how the world works and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And
You can take
but
you can take
yeah,
a biological perspective on that as well, because it's like when you put yourself in situations that you're not prepared for necessarily, or something happens that was unexpected, your DNA is going to express something new. And same thing with the scripture. Going as your life gets more difficult and more challenging, and you take on more responsibility, being in the scripture and reading and learning and revisit. Real quick, I agree with what you're saying. I think that biological parallel of expressing new DNA because of new circumstances to adapt to the things that you're learning is it's the same sort of thing with scripture. If you stay in it and you continue to read it and you learn it, as you come into new situations and new circumstances, it's almost like that scripture opens up and it expresses something new and
yeah,
unexpected that allows you to adapt to the new situation that you're going through. And so I appreciate that point you were making about that, and I agree. And it is hard to kind of teach that to kids, because there is to a certain degree they have to go through that themselves. They have to be in that
yeah,
space themselves. And but to the best of your ability, I mean, I'm glad you're doing it. I'm glad people are doing it, and
yeah,
definitely trying to do it with my kids as well, because I want them. I believe it's true, and I want them to be in that space, to be able to understand and grow and have that knowledge and that access to truth that I think gives you the closest thing to, I mean, it is truth. So the closest thing to the best possible chance to
yeah.
be successful. Um,
Right,
current
because that's what
in
you know.
this
Like
life.
it's that's I don't want to just give them the answers to whatever their current problem is. I want them to figure out how they can get the answers when no one else is there to help them. So,
Yeah.
okay, so this is the last thing that I try to ask everybody or whatever, so that we can just I'll ask you this and then we can be done. So, how has it how um how has it ever affected you, or whatever, or what contemplation have you ever put towards just the idea that like Jesus was a, a craftsman, or whatever, if we say it's carpenter or just, the word is, but some kind of a craftsman, how does, have you ever, like, what is that, how has that resonated with you, I guess, say?
Yeah. I think kind of going back to where we started our conversation, an understanding, and it is kind of tied in with what I'm trying to do. It's an integration of every aspect of your being. And part of that aspect is the material, is the substance of this earth, is the things that we work with in order to create. And I think to be a well-rounded person, you have to get your hands dirty in that sense at least once in your life. You have to have that experience in order to have that knowledge and in order to build that wisdom. And I think because Jesus came and experienced all that we experienced and went through what we went through so he could feel what we felt and just be that empathetic and connected and present God in relationship with us. Like, I think it was as simple as he had to go through that in order to have access to that in his human sense, like, if that makes
Mm.
sense. Because I know it's like, oh, he's part, I'm a Trinitarian and I believe he's part of that, and he to a degree was connected to that infinite knowledge and that infinite wisdom. But at the same time, like, he was a baby and he had to learn to use the toilet, and he had to go through that whole process of life to become a full human, a well-rounded human.
Yeah.
And I think it is important for people to look at Christ's life, even down to the specifics of what he did and how he learned and who he interacted with and how he interacted with them, and consider that maybe part of why he learned carpentry is because there is an aspect of who you are and your interaction with even just the space-time substance of things that you have to learn and experience in order to have proper perspective on. And I'm not going to argue with anybody about what just kind of was given to him because of who he was, but I think at the same time, there's no reason why God couldn't have decided that that was the way it was done. That was the way he connected, by experiencing, by those relationships, by working with his hands, by understanding the material and understanding structure and understanding the needs of his clients and things like that. And it can deteriorate quickly into a conversation about divine knowledge and how much he had and what he knew. But at the same time, I think him coming here, him becoming human, and him being born and having those experiences is absolutely necessary for him to relate to us on the level that scripture talks about, so that he can bear those burdens with us and suffer with us and feel with us and empathize on a human level. And so I think that's what comes to mind right away, like just off the top of my head. But I think it was necessary for his. So, and I would
That's
say
awesome.
for all of us.
Yeah. And that, I think so. It's the thing I had thought about so recently and thinking about this is, because people will talk about like what is like the symbolic significance of, that fact, like that he was a carpenter or whatever. Or maybe some people say he was like a stonemason or something like, or thinking about like is there a particular symbolic significance to that? And it's like there may be, there may not be, but I think that kind of one of the amazing things is that he lived one particular human life with all the experiences that it had and all of the things that it didn't have. It didn't, and that's the thing that we all experience. We all have one particular life with whatever set of circumstances we have, and that's ours. It's not somebody else's. And so it's like, so that's a way, in a sense, by being so particular, it's a thing that we can relate to him universally, which I thought.
Yeah, and at the same time, he had a body, we have a body, so we have to learn to relate to our body. He had an environment, we have an environment. He had to learn to relate to his environment, and I think that's a big part of what being a carpenter is learning to relate to his environment directly. And so, I mean, you can look at the symbolism of it, and I'm sure there's lovely conversations to be had about that. And I'm sure I've heard many of them, but at the same time, I think it's more practical in a lot of ways. It was just the process of growth, and just in his particular case, he was a carpenter, and somebody else's stonemason, and somebody else's plumber, and somebody else's, like, even if you grew up to be a lawyer or a doctor, like, there is value in having that experimental background that deals directly with the chemicals and the anatomy. And that's what you learn when you're a doctor. It's like you have to cut bodies apart, and you got to learn how they work, and you got to get your hands in there. And so I think from a practical standpoint, which I try not to be too pragmatic, but that's kind of where I'm coming from, is that it's like it was part of his growth and development. And I see that as important in everyone's life, because you can't be detached. If you're going to be functional and effective, you cannot be detached from the substance of this world. So.
Yeah. It doesn't take away from the sacred to contemplate it on the level of just it's kind of the mind-blowing thing is the more I think about like the humanity of Christ and how like the more real he becomes as a person to me, the more meaningful it is. So okay, well, it's been a good long conversation, so I think it's probably a good time to stop and get on with the rest of things. But it was really great to talk to you, and I'm sure we can talk again sometime, and maybe next time. I'm very rarely, but on occasion, if I'm up in that Dallas area, I'll give you a shout out. See if we can meet up.
Oh, absolutely. So. Let me know. I'm schedule's relatively flexible, and I'd be happy to meet you in person. But no, I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm glad we just have so many things to talk about, and we definitely have a similar background. And I hope you just drop the whole thing. I've enjoyed the whole thing. It's been great. And just like, if I'm ever down in San Antonio, same thing. I'd love to meet up in person and continue the conversation. So thank you for having me on.
All right. Yes. Thanks for sharing your time with me. All right. Have a great day.
You too.